Hi and welcome to a quick session on lighting, location lighting, and it's particularly looking at the lights that are generally available to you via the CCI loan stores. So I'm going to be referencing them, but talking about lighting and lighting principles in general, particularly the technical side of it in terms of, what voltage it draws, all the kind of boring stuff that you do kind of need to know to operate the lights safely and effectively. Bit of background about me: I've been lighting for kind of 30 odd years, from documentaries where you're kind of just using available light, supplementing it with maybe a 2 or 3 head lighting kit, to sort of full drama lighting kits where you've got a gaffer and a few sparks and generator trucks, etc. There's a little picture of me on the beach setting up an artificial moon for a night scene. You can just see the waves behind. So I've got a 4K lamp, I think it's a 4K HMI, suspended from a cherry picker, and then I've got a butterfly, which is a frame with material on it, like parachute material, to soften and diffuse the lighting. But we'll talk about a few lighting setups in brief at the end. Okay, so what are we going to cover? We're going to be looking at tungsten lights. We're going to be looking at the keener flow lighting that we've got. We're going to be looking at HMIs and available sources I thought might be useful to just touch on. Firstly though, tungsten lighting. So what is tungsten lighting? Well, as a kind of general rule of thumb, it's the old-fashioned light bulbs that get hot when you plug them in. So firstly, tungsten lighting tends to be hot lights. And you will have seen them in L4, and if you're pulling out lights from stores, you'll recognise maybe the kits of dado lights that we've got, little dado lights. They usually come in a box of 3 or 4 of them. They're dimmable and they're lensed, and you can change the sort of the spot and the focus point of them. They're great little accent lighting tools, and so those are tungsten lights. You might have also probably used the 150 watt, the 300 watt ARRI lights that are used in 212, and I think there's also some 650s and possibly a couple of 800 watt open faced ARRI lights. You can also get them in 1K lensed lights and 2K open faced lights, and they all burn hot. So there's a fire risk, and you can burn your hands on them, so you need some gloves in your bag. Always have those handy so that you can protect your hands. They all run at 3,200 degrees Kelvin on the Kelvin scale, so that's their colour temperature. But of course, if you're lighting in a room which is flooded with daylight, you'll want to convert those lights, possibly, to match the daylight. And as you know, daylight colour temperature is 5,600 degrees Kelvin. Unless it's a dawn, sunrise or a sunset, it might go down to 3,000, 2,800. Or if it's a really sunny day and you're standing in the shade, it might be as high as 7,000 degrees Kelvin. But essentially a sort of default value, this is why you see it on the cameras as a default value, 5,600 is daylight colour temperature. And to convert tungsten 3,200 to 5,600 degrees Kelvin, you need to put some gel on the lights. So full CTB, you can get CTO and you can get CTB. CTB stands for colour temperature blue, because if you put this colour temperature blue gel on the light, you get the colour temperature of daylight. If conversely you're wanting to convert a 5,600 degree Kelvin light to tungsten, you'd put CTO on it, colour temperature orange, which is an orange coloured gel, and that converts it back to tungsten. So what else does your kit come with? Well, obviously a stand. Stands, check that they're there and they're working. Diffusion, and usually that is a trace, F1 or F2 trace. You can ask for trace, that should come with the kit. Bounce is something you'll often use, a little reflector. Usually has a silver side and a white side. Silver, well, you can get them with gold sides as well. I mean, they tend to be a little bit harsh. I 99% of the time use the white side. You get less kick out of it, but it's a softer and more forgiving and more subtle light. The barn doors on the light, which you can use to control the light with. Gobos. Gobos are kind of little shapes basically that you put in front of the light and make patterns and shadows on the wall, or just kind of confuse the lighting pattern. And dimmers. Some lights, well, the dado lights, for example, they come with an inline dimmer, which is very useful. You can obviously dim or brighten the light. The problem is with the tungsten dimmable lights is that when you dim them, yes, they get less intense, but you also change their color balance. So their Kelvin will change from 3200, and the more you dim it, the warmer it'll get. So it'll go from 3200 to 3000 to 2000. So you need to be aware of that when you're lighting. Okay, let's move on. I'm going to talk about HMIs. HMIs are portable but very powerful lights. They come in all shapes and sizes, right down to usually a 575, probably something like that is the smallest one you're probably going to come across. And then the next stop up is a 1.2. We've got 1.2 HMIs in the Lone stores. And then you can get a 1.8 and a 2.5. And you can get 4Ks, 6, 8s, 10s, 12s, 18Ks. But as soon as you go above a 2.5 HMI, you can't plug it into the wall. You need a separate power source. They're pulling so much power. So we've got 1.2s because it means you can plug them into a domestic wall socket. We'll talk more about how much power you can draw from a wall socket shortly. So what comes in the kit, or when you pick it up, you need to check that it's all there. One of the first things that you do with the camera kit, obviously, you check it's all there, and you do a little test on the camera to make sure it's working. Well, the lights are no different. You need to fire the light up for 2 or 3 minutes to make sure it's working. So with an HMI, if you turn the light on, it'll flicker and buzz, the light will be a bit green, and it'll take 2 or 3 minutes to get up to its color temperature until it's running. While it's doing that, you need to leave it on. So when we say flash the light, we mean turn it on, leave it on, let it warm up, get up to color temperature. Once it's hot and running for 2 or 3 minutes, then you can turn it off. The problem is with turning it off before then is it damages the bulb. And conversely, if you turn the light off, leave it off for 2 or 3 minutes, let the filaments cool down, contract, and if you need to restrike it, turn it on again, then wait a few minutes before you do that. Often it won't restrike, or it'll blow the bubble if you try and restrike it immediately. So you get the head, which is the lighting head itself. In that should be a bubble, and these days you won't get a spare bubble, which is why you've got to take care of the bubble. We did used to send them out as standard with the kits at university, as they do in a hire shop. But I'm afraid that too many occasions the spare bubble never came back with the kit, and you know, they're not cheap. There'll be a header cable which connects the ballast to the head, the ballast itself which is a sort of power transformer, and then there'll be the stand. You can get something called a high lift extension, which goes on top of the stand and it raises it by another few feet. You can also get stands which have extending legs, so one of the legs you can unscrew and tilt the stand on its side. Why would you want to do that? Well, if you're on a hill, you might want to extend the downhill leg to make the stand straight. You should bring some sandbags, order some sandbags with the kit, because you will need to sandbag the bottom of the stand. These are heavy items, and they can topple over, so it needs to be sandbagged, as really any of your lighting stands ought to be. Now their colour temperature is always daylight. They always, if you strike one up, it's going to run at 5,600 to 6,000 degrees Kelvin. So it's daylight. It mimics daylight. And if you want to transform it to tungsten, obviously you need to put some CTO, colour temperature orange, on it in order to convert it to 3,200. Now often these are used outside, so they're often going to be liable to be exposed to the elements, wind, which is why it needs to be sandbagged. If it starts getting windy, you want to make sure that these lights aren't on the top of their stand, because they will fall over in a wind. I'm afraid people have lost their lives on film sets with these things falling down when they haven't been used properly. Rain. Obviously, water and electricity don't mix. If it's raining, you don't want to put the light up. Obviously, if it's a dry day, it's not raining, you can put your lamp up. If it begins to rain, though, while you're shooting, you need to make a judgment call. If it's a fine kind of drizzle, keep the light firing, and anything, because the light will be so hot at that point, any rain falling on the outside of the case is just going to immediately dry and fry, if you like. If it's a downpour, then obviously turn the light off and disconnect it from the power source. And do not restrike it unless you're 100% convinced that it's dry. Now, these lights are great for using as a hard light source. It's hard light and soft light, as you know. The hardest light you can get, really, is if you walk outside on a bright sunny day, not a cloud in the sky, and let's say it's noon, the sun's pretty much above you, look down at the pavement and there'll be a really hard shadow, outline shadow of your body on the pavement, and that denotes a hard light. It's a very hard light, very crisp, unidirectional. All the light beams are travelling in one direction from the sun, and so you get that hard shape outline. That's kind of the hardest natural light that you can encounter. What about the softest? Well, the softest light you could get is if you walked outside and it's a very overcast day. Let's say it's full of snow clouds. Let's say there's snow on the ground, and so from horizon to horizon there's like a silk diffusion. It's just a cloud base, and that's diffusing the light incredibly softly. You've also got bounce light coming up from the snow. If you look at a film like The Revenant, you'll see something like this, but very soft. And if you look down at the ground, you probably won't be able to detect a shadow because it's such because the lighting is so evenly spread. A very beautiful light, in fact. But that's a very soft light. And so if you put an HMI up on the stand, pointed at something, that's a hard light source. You can diffuse it with, like you saw in the picture earlier, a frame with a butterfly silk on it, or some F1 or F2 frost. You can get something called a chimera, which fits in front of some of these lights, which is like a light box, which are great units because they actually kind of tuck in the sides, stop the light spilling everywhere. You can bounce them off a big sheet of poly. Fantastic tool, and that gives you a really very pretty soft light. You will lose some of the power of the light, but you get a beautifully soft light coming through. And a lot of these HMIs have dimmers on the choke boxes, on the ballasts, and you might be able to dim it down to about 50%. And you've got a spot and flood mechanism. Now, we've also got keener flows. Terrific lights. There's some older style ones which have got like fluorescent tube lighting in, and those lights, well, firstly they're lightweight. They run cold, so there's no heat issues with them, and you get the head, and I think we've got 4-foot keener flows, so it's kind of 4 feet long, and it's got 4 fluorescent tubes in them, and they're put up, generally they're put on a C stand, which are those stands that you're going to have quite a fight with if you want to. A C stand, and it also comes with a little ballast unit which runs between the mains and the light, and it's like a transformer. And also there's a header cable to connect the transformer to the light bag. You'll also need some sandbags with these lights to put on the C stands to make sure that they don't fall over. But it is a soft, cool source naturally. Now the tubes, the fluorescent tubes, usually in the box it comes with 4 3200 degree colour temperature tubes, so they match tungsten lighting. But also there's 5600 degree daylight tubes in there, and you can pull the tubes out quite easily. You just disconnect them and swap them over, so you can swap your tungsten colour balance for your daylight colour balance, or you can mix them. You know, often you might want you don't want either a 3200 or 5600, you want to match maybe some office lighting. And you could put 4600 degrees Kelvin in there effectively by mixing the tubes, have a couple of 3200s and a couple of 5600s. So you can mount them on a C stand, you can lay them on the floor, prop them up against a box, pretty hardy, or you can have two stands with, say, a polecat over the top, and you can mount the Kinoflow over the top. And because it's relatively lightweight, it's safe to do that. You can also further soften it. It's a pretty soft sauce, but you can soften it further. Often the kit has a little silk in it which just attaches to the front of the light and just further softens the light. It's a very nice light to light close-ups with. Very forgiving. It's a beautiful soft sauce. We've recently also got Kinoflow Freestyle lights, and they come in the yellow boxes, and these are terrific units. They're not cheap. I think they cost, I don't know, £3,000 or something, £3,500 when we bought them. For a light, it's a lot of money. Need to be looked after, but they're very flexible, and they're LED based. And the great thing about them is you don't have to put any colour gels in, you don't have to swap the tubes out, because they will, on the dial, on the menu system, they will dial in any colour temperature that you want pretty much. So it can go from 3,200 to 5,600 to 7,000 down to 2,000 just on a dial, which is absolutely terrific. And also some colour effects, you can put some reds, purples, greens in there, really useful. They even have a couple of special effects. I think they do like a blue kind of police light effect. They do a sort of flickering TV screen effect, and also lightning effect. So they're great tools to use. Let's talk about available sauce. Brown sauce and ketchup is usually on the table, but there are a few other ones. But available sauces are always worth checking out and thinking about when you're planning a lighting scenario. It's often, it's usually always cheaper to use an available sauce, obviously, and I'm talking outside of daylight as one of the sources now. So whenever you go on a recce, or you start thinking about how you're going to shoot a scene, thinking about available sources, or sources that you can use as props legitimately in the scene, is a good workaround. And you'll see it more and more with the sensitivity of cameras increasing these days. You can see a lot of series where a lot of scenes are utilising available sources, or what looks like incidental sources. Lamps, for example, which have probably been placed there specifically by the DOP in order to light the scene in a convincing way, in a motivated way. But obviously the first thing you'd look at in a house is the house lights. What have you got when you say house lights? You walk into a studio, they'll turn the house lights on, which are all the sort of fluorescent lights that are on the top of the building. So any room you go into, see what you can use from the house lights, and depending on what you want from a scene, if you're shooting in a hospital, you might want the house lights because they give that kind of sort of flat, even light. Or a corridor scene, you might want to keep the lights that they've got. You might want to keep some of them on. Often I've shot in something like an office corridor, for example, for a scene, and there isn't any daylight in there, but there'll be quite useful house lights already installed in the ceiling. So I'd want to check them, and I'd want to see, are they all the same colour temperature? And often they're not. Over the years they've been replaced by the caretaker, so there's a mixture of daylight sources and tungsten lights and 4,600 lights, so you get different colours. So before a shoot I might have to go in there and change the lights over so they're all the same colour temperature. I might take some of the bulbs out so that every alternate light is lit. I might even put a lighting effects box in, so one of the lights is flickering, and if it's like a horror film or something, you can do that kind of thing. But the house lights, can often give you a good lighting solution, or motivate the other lights that you might be bringing in. Car headlights, it's a useful source. Night scenes are laborious to light. They're potentially dangerous. You're working in the dark, and you've got to rig them during the day, really. And so if you can find a way to utilise car headlights or street lights these days, cameras are fast, then you should think about doing that. You might be able to engineer your scene so that it is lit naturally by the car headlights. Even, don't forget, you can do the same things with car headlights as you can do with ordinary lights. You can bounce them into a piece of polystyrene. You can put some diffusion on them. You can put some colour on them. Once they're out of the shot, but they're still the motivational source, you can do all sorts of stuff. You can do all sorts of things with them. And the naked flame, that might be a candle. In one of my lectures, don't I talk about those triple wick candles, which are candles with 3 wicks close together that just burn brighter, that you can get for TV and film productions. Bonfires are all light sources. I mean, gas flame bonfires are pretty useful, where it's just a bottle of gas, and the gas comes down a pipe and to a sort of homemade copper ring, usually with holes in it, but that gives you the flames, and that's quite a good light source, and quite important, as opposed to a bonfire, which you've got to keep maintaining, and it eliminates the issue with smoke, which bonfire smoke is not the same as effects smoke, because as soon as you get it in your eyes, you start crying and choking. It can affect the actors, so be very careful if you're using a natural bonfire. Table lamps, are great solutions. You can get all sorts of lampshades. You can put all sorts of lamps in there, all sorts of lights, varying degrees of colour and brightness. You can even get these lights where you can change the lighting colour of the bulb, which are worth experimenting with. You just got to sort out the power to them. We talked about available sources, windows, obviously. I said I was going to exclude daylight, but as soon as you walk into your location, have a look what is happening with the daylight. Of course, don't you, to check where the room is facing. In other words, the window, is it south facing? Are you there on a cloudy day and you think, great, there's nice soft light in here, and you forget to check whether it's south facing, and when you come back to do your scene, there's bright sun rays pouring in through the window, which might look fantastic for an hour until the sun moves over the top of the building and your continuity goes. So always check. Do you need to diffuse the light? Do you want to put curtains in front of those windows? What colour should the curtains be? What material should it be? Should it be translucent? Do you want to block it out? Have a think about that. Mirrors, very useful indeed, especially if you're out in the wilds, and I've used them a lot for all sorts of things. Getting light into a cave. I had a mirror. It's probably kind of 3 foot by 3 foot mirror on a stand, which I could maneuver as the sun moved. I could change. I had somebody on the stand, and they could adjust the mirror. So the mirror came down, the sunlight came down, hit the mirror, and the mirror thumped the light in through the cave entrance. You get an incredible amount of light doing that, and you can obviously bounce it into a reflector or put it into 2 mirrors and bounce it. It's a bit of a game of logistics in order to get everything to line up, but very useful. Also, kicking the light into the side of the lens to give it a flare with a mirror. It doesn't have to be a big mirror, a little hand mirror, makeup mirror. Keep it in your bag, kick it into the side of the lens if you want a flare. Play around with that, see what sort of effects you can get. Mobile phones out in the dark, cigarette lighters, can all give light. Are they in the script? Could they be in the script? Torches, head torches, all sorts of ideas that you can think about lighting. Little lights that plug into a USB port with a little LED on the end. You can light a car interior with that these days. You can still soften them or bounce them. So the available sources are great to use. Okay, let's move on. Power, what do you need? Power, obviously, if you're doing a recce, you've got to check, make sure there's power there. And mains in the UK, 13 amps, all you've probably heard of it, 13 amp socket. But how many lights can you run off that 13 amp socket? You need to know, you're the DOP, you actually need to know, unless you've got a spark or a gaffer with you, and they'll know. If you haven't, you need to know how many amps your lights will draw. So, if you've got a kit of 300 watt lamps with you, they're all going to plug into the mains. How many can you plug in? And is the kettle in the kitchen plugged into the same ring main? What's going to happen when you blow the circuit? So you need to know how many amps your lights draw. Now there is, fortunately, a formula for working it out. So let's say you've got a 1 kilowatt light. So that's not 150 or a 300 or a 600 or an 800. It's a 1000 watts. So you know you've got 1000 watts, for example, and you know that the mains, the volts coming from the 13 amp socket is 240 volts. If you divide 1000 watts by 240 volts, you end up with 4.17 amps. And you know that you can draw 13 amps, let's call it 10 to be safe. So you know you can plug two 1K lights into that main socket without it blowing. You can keep that little formula handy. It's watts divided by volts equals amps. And you know how many amps come out of a 13 amp socket in the wall. Okay, let's move on. What about power if you haven't got power? If you're filming in the woods and you decide, no, I'm not going to use torches, I'm not going to use mobile phones, I'm not going to use head torches, I'm not going to use fire, I'm not going to use gas, I'm going to use HMIs, or I'm not going to use battery lights. There's some great battery lights. The little blind spot lights which we've got in stores are terrific little units. I don't think they make them anymore, so but they're terrific. But you decided that you need a big moonlit scene, so you need at least 1 or 2 HMIs set up. So you need generators, a portable generator to drive, in this instance, your 1.2 HMI that you've got from stores. So you've got to go and get a Jenny. You know it needs to generate 1200 watts. But when the generator fires up, as you tested it in stores, you know there's a lot of buzzing, whirring and crackling as it pulls more power than it will be running on. So there's an initial real power surge that it draws. So you need to allow for what's called sparking pull. And then also, if you've got a long cable run to get from the light to the generator, then you've got to allow for power to be lost in that cable run. So if I'm going to run a 1.2 HMI that I've got from stores, I'm going to go and hire a 3000 watt generator. And I can get one from between, well, last time I checked it was like from 25 to 100 quid a day, something like that, depending on what type you get. At the top here you can see a nice little generator, which is the 3K Jenny, which is blimped. So in other words, it's in a little box to run quietly. It actually still makes quite a noise, but nevertheless it's quieter than the one below it, which is a lot cheaper, but it's a lot noisier. So you need to think about that. You know, talk to your sound department. Listen, I'm doing a night shoot. I'm going to be running the HMIs and I'm going to have a generator there. And the sound department will go, right, okay, what are we going to do about the dialogue and the noise? So you need to come up with some solutions. All sorts of things you can do. You can, enclose them in polystyrene boxes, homemade, as long as there's air can get in and out. In the past, I have had them dug into a shallow grave and cover them over with wood and then earth, and had a sort of drain pipe going in and out, pointing away from the set so that the air can get into them. But you need to consider that, and you need to make sure, it says jumpers, 16 to 13 amp jumpers. Generally these generators have 16 amp outlets, and you want 13 amp to get to your kit, so you can get something which connects the two, which is called a jumper. It's an interface, power interface, so that make sure when you hire it, it comes with that. And also they're going to be running off petrol, so don't forget the petrol, and think about where you're going to keep it. Are you going to keep it right next to it, next to the heat of the HMI light, or are you going to have it, or are you going to place it somewhere safe? Of course, if you are in the middle of the woods, one of the most irritating things about having a film is you have to keep changing the batteries because the batteries keep draining. So, why not set up a little battery recharge point off this generator at the same time? They don't pull very negligible power, so it's useful to have a little four-way where you can plug in your battery charger and keep the batteries charging. And by the way, you'll become the favourite of the production manager because they always want to charge their laptop or possibly boil a kettle, but it's useful to have an offer to some members of production. But the other source, of course, power, while we're on it, the V-Locks often run lights. I think the V-Locks actually can run the Keener Flow freestyles. So, you know, you want, so if you're shooting outside, you might want to order some extra V-Locks if you can, have them fully charged, work out how many you're going to get. Have they been charged? I'm sure they'll say, yes, they're charged. Do you want to check they're charged up before you use them? How long are they going to run for? If you're the DOP and you're running your lights on batteries all night, well, how long is that going to give you? How long does a V-Lock on the back of a little LED panel light or on the back of a Keener Flow freestyle last for? The answer is it depends on how old the battery is and how charged it is. And so something that you might want to do is to get the kit out early or test it. So go down the loan stores beforehand, get all the batteries, get the light, turn it on, see how long the battery lasts and the next one lasts. Because it may be that you've got 3 batteries and they only give you 20 minutes each. And so you want to know that you've only got 1 hour's filming tomorrow night, you know, before that happens, so that you can tell the director and the producer. Because you don't want to be on the shoot and then after 60 minutes you've run out of battery power and the director says, okay, where's the lights? And you're the DOP and you say, we've run out of batteries. Because obviously the next question is well, where are the other batteries? Why didn't you tell me this before? You need to know boring stuff like this, otherwise you look like a goat. That's what happened to me. Okay, let's move through this. Possible problems. Scenario: water and electricity do not mix. It's obvious, isn't it? Possible problems: have you got permission to put those lights up where you're putting them up? Wind, keep an eye on the wind. You can actually rope the lights down. Always have somebody there. If it's getting windy, lower the lamp. Rain, keep an eye on it. Don't fire stuff up in the wet. Don't turn stuff off and then turn it back on again. Keep an eye on it. Health and safety risk assessments. What more do I need to say? Here's a possible problem. I was going back, this goes back to that first slide I showed you. Here's my moon, here's the cherry picker with my moonlight on it, down at the beach. And I've got the cherry picker here. There's the 4K lamp. That's the diffusion hanging underneath it. It's actually on rods, so it doesn't wave about in the wind too much. And then I've also got a big, that's going to be put up here on the stand. That's an 18K HMI running off a generator, which is going to be giving me a lightning effect. And I've got these little poles here that you can see are for rain effect. So I'm pumping water through those to give rain. And then just behind here, there's a wind machine, which is going to give me wind. And just to make it more fun, the tide's coming in. So, you know, everything has to continually move back as the tide comes up the beach. I also did the tide going out. That's what it looks like at night. And that's a kind of a still frame grabbed from the action, shot that on red camera. What about lighting and your films? Right, do come and talk to me anytime about lighting setups that you're thinking of doing. We can go through some of the possibilities. I've shot loads of stuff and some of it might coincide with what you're considering shooting, and there's usually a couple of ways around your lighting problems. So I'm always interested and happy to talk those through, and you know, there's absolutely no obligation to use the scatty ideas that I come up with, but they might be useful to inform your ideas, and just talking things through sometimes really helps. If you can, then do bring some location photographs with you. You can't have too many of those, so that we can have a look at the location and, of course, where the sun is going to be travelling. Come armed with that information too, if it's pertinent to you. Anytime. Okay, that's it. DOP lighting, location, craft. Head on down to stores, pick up some equipment, and enjoy lighting. There'll be more on lighting coming up shortly. Thanks very much for tuning in. I'll see you down the road.